Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Saturday Gita class with Gita Dhyanam. Om Pathaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasen Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritvarshine Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Amatvam Anusandhame Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshine नमोस्तु ते व्यास विशाल बुद्धे फुल अरविंद आयत पत्र नेत येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्ण प्रज्वलितो ज्ञान में प्रदीप परपान पारे जाताए तोत्र वेत्र एक पाने ज्ञान मुद्राए कृष्णाए गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोगता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव वसुतम देवम कंस चानूरमर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगद्गुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ जला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्ये ग्राहवती कृपेन वाहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सोतीर्ना खलु पांडवैरनदी कवर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थगंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरिकथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदे रह पेपिये मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल प्रध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिम यत्कृपातमहं वंदे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्ये स्तवे वेदै सांग पद क्रमोपनिषदै गायन्ति यम सामगा ज्ञानवस्थे तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुर सुर असुर गणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. Okay, let's open our books. We finished our chapter 6 last week, Atam Sanyam Yoga, and that also ended the first section. See, some people say that Gita can be divided into 3 sections, 18 chapters, 3 sections, and first section predominantly Karam Yoga, and the second section, which opens up with the 7th chapter, and it will conclude with the 12th chapter, the Bhakti Yoga. And this is predominantly devotion part. And the last section, chapter 13 to 18, will be the Gyan, emphasis on the Gyan, the knowledge. So we saw in the previous chapter that Lord Krishna not only gave the technique of self-realization through the methods of concentration and meditation, but he also concluded with the very personal opinion. He said that the noblest is he who by different paths reaches me. So according to the Lord, a meditator who tries to concentrate his mind upon the self is a superior. That means he is a yogi. He is superior to a tapasvi. Tapasvi is a person who strives to deny all sense enjoyment through this body. And he says he is superior to a jnani also, who makes deep and learned investigations into the scriptural literature. Then he said he is even better than a karmi, who has dedicated himself to selfless service of the society. Okay, so yogi bhav arjuna, yogi. And among the meditator, who is the most noble, it was also declared there. The one who has successfully merged his mind in the nature of the pure consciousness, because a lot of people meditate, but who is the best? Through the path of single-minded meditation, he says, he reaches the highest and he is the noblest. Naturally, after hearing all this, there will be some doubt in a listener's mind. And in order to remove his doubt, Lord Krishna is opening this particular chapter. The name of the chapter is Jnana Viganan Yog. And he's making a promise that he will explain to Arjun the entire science, both in its theoretical and speculative aspects, and clear all his possible doubts on this subject. Okay, so that is the real significance of this chapter. So remember what he said in the last chapter. The last few verses is the start of this chapter. Lord Krishna says in the very first verse, with the mind intent on me, O Parth, practicing yoga, and over here practicing yoga means the meditation, and taking refuge in me, that means surrendering to me, you shall without doubt know me fully. He says, hear that from me. So naturally, the doubt of all seekers, especially before they enter the seat of meditation, as how it is possible for a limited mind to understand God fully. How can this limit mind can embrace the unlimited? This doubt can come to such seekers who try only for intellectual appreciation of this philosophy. Because we try to understand intellectually first. So that's why the doubts are always in the intellect. So this intellect is doubting it. So that's why this stage, even a doubting stage, is very unavoidable stage on the path of knowledge. That means you are listening, you are paying attention, but you have a little doubt. And to remove these doubts, this chapter is here. The mind, when made to meditate upon the infinite, comes to transcend its own limitations and experience the infinite. Remember, from this chapter onward, the term mind, we got to understand not as a disintegrated mind, but as an integrated mind. Because a seeker is on the path of this development now. Has not reached there yet, but still there is an integration there. So obeying, this mind is obeying the will of discriminative intellect. This mind is listening to the higher mind, which is called intellect. That's why I call this an integrated mind. And the logic of this inward development would be the theme of this section. This section means from chapter 7 all the way to chapter 12. In the next verse, Lord Krishna says, I shall declare to you in full this knowledge combined with the realization, which being known, nothing more here remains to be known. So over here, Lord Krishna is promising that he shall not only deliver to Arjun the theoretical explanations of the art of divine life, but also during his very course, he will take him to the highest peak of self-discovery. If this is a complete science, and the experience of the divinity of the self can be had, then how is it that self-realized masters are so rare in this world? One time I asked my own Gurudev Ji, how many realized people on this earth right now? Very clearly he said, you can count on the fingers of one hand. That's how rare it is. So if it's doable, why is it so rare? Let's see what Lord Krishna says. He says, among thousands of people, one perchance strives for perfection. And even among those successful strivers, only 1% knows me in essence. So it is that rare. Very few people can discover in themselves this necessary urge to evolve. We just get tempted by this Maya so easily. We just don't want to go towards this path. Sure, we start out. Even though this meditation is a very popular thing right now, but if you really ask the meditators, how often you meditate? Most of them off and on. They start out, but enthusiasm is just like a soda pop bottle enthusiasm. In the beginning, it's a lot of enthusiasm that is fizzes out. So when somebody says off and on, that really means more off than on. So that's why Lord Krishna says, very few can discover in themselves the necessary urge to evolve. Only a few sincerely apply themselves to live fully the yogic way of life. So it's not just a meditation alone. Lord Krishna said, you got to watch what you do all day long. Moderation in eating, moderation in sleeping, moderation everywhere. Having prepared the hearer for the teaching by inducing in him a taste for it, the Lord Krishna says in next verse, he's trying to give what this prakriti is made up of. What this Maya is, which really deludes us. In verse 4, he says, earth, water, fire, air, ether. Mind, intellect, ego. This is my eightfold prakriti. Ashtadha prakriti. So he is explaining in this and the following verse what all items together constitute the matter part in us. And what exactly constitute the spiritual entity within a living person. So our body, mind, intellect, ego. This is the prakriti. The five great elements, mind, intellect, and ego, constitute the eightfold prakriti that has come to be superimposed upon the truth through ignorance. Remember that. Five great cosmic elements are represented in the microcosm by the five sense organs, by which the individual comes to experience and live in the world of sense objects. So the list making up the prakriti is nothing other than the subtle body. The senses are subtle. Sense organs are gross, but sense, that power behind the organ is subtle. That is the vehicle of expression constitute. That is the sense organs. So sense perception, mental reception, and intellectual assimilation, there is a continuous sense of I-ness, which is called ego. And that ego is also part of prakriti. So what then is your higher nature? Lord Krishna says in verse 5, that this is the inferior prakriti. So prakriti part, the matter part is inferior, but different from it. He says, O mighty armed, know this, my higher prakriti, the very life element by which this world is upheld. It is the spiritual entity that makes it possible for the body, mind, and intellect, made up of the mere inert minerals, to act as if they were in themselves so vitally sentient and intelligent. So that means without the Atma, without the higher, the lower cannot function. It's almost like without electricity, bulb cannot shine. Without electricity, TV cannot show us the picture. So the lower needs the higher. So in philosophy, he used the word Jagat over here. this Jagat is upheld. Jagat means not only the world of objects perceived by us through our sense organs, but it includes the world experienced also. The world we interpret also through our mind and intellect. That's also a Jagat. So the world of objects, the world of feelings, plus the world of ideas. In totality, that is the Jagat, the world. Because normally we think it's only the objects. No, it's all of it together. Know that these two prakritis, lower and higher, are the womb of all beings. So I am the source and dissolution of the whole universe. So that is the God element. So there is a matter, there is the Atma, and there's God. So that's why I always tell you, just remember these three things: Prakriti, Purusha, and Parmeshwar. That constitute the whole thing. So the above mentioned higher and lower nature, each functioning in the embrace of the other. So lower needs the higher, higher needs the lower also in order to manifest. So this causes the manifestation of the world. So if the bulb needs the electricity, electricity needs the bulb too, to show the light. But then he says, as question can come into our mind, maybe there is something higher than God. In verse number 7, he says, there's nothing whatsoever higher than me. All this is strung in me as clusters of gems on a string. Beautiful Sanskrit verse. Mei sarvam idam protam sutre manigana eva. So these are like gems. And I am the thread which keeping them all together. In other words, Lord is the common factor in all forms in the universe. Then to further explain, he says in number 8, I am the sapidity in water, the ras in the water. I am the light in the moon and the sun. I am the syllable Om. In all the Vedas, I am the sound in ether and virility in man. I am the sweet fragrance in earth, the brilliance in the fire, the life in all beings, and I am the austerity in the austere. Tapacha asmi tapasvishu. So essence of everything, he says, that I am. This is the eternal factor which is common in everyone, yet not readily perceptible to all. That's why the doubt comes into our mind. Because in order to perceive it, we have to meditate. So that which remains in a substance from the beginning to the end, constantly, and without which the thing cannot ever maintain its identity, is the essence. And that is also called dharma, the law of a being. So the self is the life in all being, dharma of everything. Then he gives more examples. He says, know me, O Partha, as the eternal seed of all beings. Eternal seed. This seed does not get destroyed even after sprouting. Eternal seed. I am the intelligence of the intelligent, the splendor of the splendid things and the beings. Tejaha tejasvi nam aham. Of the strong, I am the strength. But then he puts over there, devoid of desire and attachment. Because normally our strength is because of the desires or the attachment. He says, I am that without those. And in all beings, I am the desire unopposed to dharma. So that means I always stay in alignment of the dharma. Generally, an individual expresses his might and strength only when he is goaded by the desires or attachment. What is a desire? Calm. Desire for what is absent, that is calm. Okay, something I don't have, I want to have, that is calm. And what is rag, that attachment? It's always attachment is for what you have already obtained. You don't want to let it go. So both of these, desire also, attachment also, keep us attached to the prakriti. Then he says, I am the strength devoid of desire and attachment. Remember that, very powerful statement over here. All actions and thoughts that hasten the evolution of a person to rediscover his essential divine nature are considered as righteous actions. Punya karam. So we got to do the punya karam. Opposite of that is the papa karam, the unrighteous behavior. Whenever our activities of our mind and intellect, they take us away from our true divine nature. And whenever we behave in a degrade way, like an animal we do, then we are going down on our evolutionary status. Remember that. Does it mean that the spirit has been really captured and jailed by the matter? Because he's talked about two. He talked about the prakriti, he talked about the soul. So are we captured? Think about it. How can a limited limit the unlimited? Because Atma is unlimited. It's part of God. How can it be limited? In verse number 12 of this chapter, Lord Krishna says, whatever beings and objects that are pure, active, and inert, know them to proceed from me, yet I'm not in them, they are in me. There's a paradoxical statement in this verse, which really indicating the relationship between the soul and the matter, actually. This is how we understand, how we can understand, are we really captured? No, we are not. Because the relationship between the soul and matter is not in terms of a cause and its effect. It is only as a superimposition of matter upon the soul. Superimposition. Let me give you the example. It's like an ocean says, the wave rise, stay, and dissolve in me. But I'm not in the waves. I'm not in the waves. That's how it is. The self declares here that even though matter depends entirely for its existence upon the conscious principle, which is soul, yet the divine spark is no way under the matter. Ocean is ocean, even without the waves, but waves cannot exist without the ocean. Our mind thinks that we have been captured. Our mind thinks that we are limited, but actually we are not. So that's what the superimposition is. And in the following verse, Lord Krishna regrets that the world is not understanding him in his pure nature. And what is this ignorance on the part of the world due to? In verse 13, he says, deluded by these natures, composed of three guns of prakriti, all this world knows me not. That means we get deluded by this maya. He says they do not know me as immutable and distinct from them. That means we have forgotten our true nature and we think we are just a prakruti. Deluded by the modification of the three guns, identifying with the Maya products, self comes to play the tragic role of the ego. And we all know what ego is. Ego is the non-identification of ourself. When we think that we are the body, when we think what we have earned, what we have accumulated, what people call us, that's all ego. And the ego, in its own preoccupations with the outer world and idle imaginations, find itself incapable of knowing its own true nature. Verse number 14. He says, verily this divine illusion of mine, made up of gunas, is difficult to cross over. Then in the next line, he says, those who take refuge in me alone come to cross over this illusion. That's why I was telling you that from this chapter onward, there's a bhakti. Refuge really means bhakti, surrender. We can surrender only when we love. Otherwise, we cannot surrender. After declaring the seriousness of the disease and the prescription, he is giving us a guarantee, a complete cure for the malady of a human being. In this verse, he says, those who devote themselves to me alone. The key word is alone. And we got to just remember in chapter 6, where he talked about the meditation, he talked about one-pointed concentration, contemplation on the self. Then why all those who meditate upon you are not experiencing your glory? Because we talked about thousands start, but they fail. He tells us in the verse number 15, the evildoers, the deluded, the lowest of men do not seek me. They whose discrimination has been destroyed by their own delusions follow the way of the demons. We could be meditating, we could be going to the temple, but if our actions are evil, if we are deluded, and we don't understand and we don't want to walk on the path of divinity, we are moving towards this negative nature, we cannot overcome our delusion to realize the divine in ourselves. So it's not just a sitting down meditation just for a few minutes, it's all day long. What do we do? So these people, they cannot find me, but then in 16, verse number 16, he tells us the other way also. He says, these are the four with different approaches can find me. Four kinds of virtuous people worship me, O Arjun. The dissatisfied, the seeker of knowledge, the seeker of wealth, and the wise. Arth, Jigyasu, Artha, Arthi, and Jnani. So these four, they are connecting with me even when they are distressed about this Maya also. But they know that I am the giver of all this. So they do get to me. Because in all true prayers, the ego surrenders itself to this God with a demand to its Lord to manifest and function in any given scheme of activity. We have a rare few who approach the temple of the soul demanding nothing. They carry with themselves the offerings, but they don't demand anything. They totally surrender. They cry their heart because they want to end this sense of separation. And these are the wise he talks about. There are 4. So wise is the best. Even though all these 4 are great, but wise, he says of them, the wise, ever steadfast and devoted to the one, excels. I am exceedingly dear to the wise, and he is dear to me. He doesn't want anything from me. All he does is he wants me from me. So he's almost like comparing and contrasting these 4 virtuous people. And he says, because Jnani is the one who wants to know. Artharth is the one who wants some wealth. And Arth is the one who has some kind of a despair. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be something he wants from God. So it's very scientifically viewed. This is how we observe our mind. Because it's always very powerfully charged with a certain emotion. It could be a sorrow, it could be a hatred, it could be a jealousy, love, or kindness. So the emotions come up in our heart. And even the infinite and the eternal truth has to helplessly come under the charm of a pure and selfless meditation. That is called Ek Bhakti. So then other 3, aren't they good? He says, no, they are also noble. In verse number 18, he says, noble indeed are all these, but the wise man, the Jnani, I deem as my very self. Steadfast in mind, he is established in me alone as the supreme goal. He becomes one with it. And he says, this is my personal opinion, matam. At the end of many births, the wise man comes to me. So the journey is not finished, just becoming a wise. He says, realizing that all this is Vasudeva. That means innermost self. Such a Mahatma is very hard to find. Such pure people of wisdom are necessary, a rare few. And now it will be shown why the people are not generally aware that the self alone is the all. In verse number 20, he says, those whose wisdom has been looted away by this or that desire, go to other gods. That means this material desire is the cause for us to get distracted, following this or that right, led by their own nature. Desires are the springs from which thoughts continuously gurgle up to flood the mental zone. We can look at our own mind. Any given time, there's always some kind of a desire, keeps on disturbing us. And that's why because of the desires, we don't see our real nature, who we are. And what then is the function of the Atma, the guardian angel in each one of us? Verse number 21, he says, whatsoever form any devotee desires to worship with faith, that same faith of his I make firm and unflinching. That's what's happening. This is why Bhagavad Gita is considered an universal scripture. Even the other desires, they are being fulfilled by him alone. Because we all know all people do not worship at the same altar. Each one approaches the same truth by worshipping the idol of his own heart. Wherever and whatsoever form any devotee seeks to worship with Shraddha, his faith, he says, I make unwavering. Endued with that faith, he engages in the worship of that Devta, and from it he obtains his desire. All these beings ordained indeed by me alone. Being dispersed by me alone. So that means that God is the source of all activities, fulfillment, and everything else. But the deluded ones, they desire the finite sense objects. They do not come to me. So that's why he says, verily the fruit that accrues to those people of little intelligence is finite. The worshippers of the Devtas go to the Devtas, and by my devotees come to me. So we can have God, but from God also we are asking smaller gifts. So he says, sure, I give it to them, whatever they want. Me, when he uses the word me means infinite reality, principle of consciousness, absolute truth. That's what me is. Then why do people in general fail to reach the self? He says, the foolish think of me, the unmanifest, as having come to manifestation. This is verse number 24. Not knowing my higher, immutable, and peerless nature. So that means they really don't know me in essence. So that which is called the manifest is available either for the perceptions of the sense organs, or for the feelings of the mind, or for the understanding of the intellect. That is called manifest. So the present condition of ignorance and confusion is the limited finite ego, is brought out very vividly in the following, under this contrasting background of the self. Verse number 26, he says, I know, O Arjuna, the beings of the past and the present and the future, but no one knows me. So this is the idea he's giving, that God is omniscient, beginningless beginning of creation. He's declaring here that he knows everything at all times, in all places. He is known by none at any place, at any time. And if the self is the eternal knower of all conditioned knowledge, then what veils this essential nature from our realization of the same? Verse number 27, by the delusion of the pairs of opposite, arising from desire and aversion, all beings are subject to delusion. At birth, scorcher of fear. Scorcher of fear means the Arjuna. He is trying to encourage Arjuna. So these pairs of opposite, they keep us deluded. Very highly scientific approach over here. Very subtle philosophical truth, he is giving it to us. Because he says, very birth of an individual. Because why did we take birth? Into any embodiment? Because we had certain desire. And fulfillment of our deep craving and secret desires. So that's why he said, at birth. Otherwise, we would have never taken a birth. To show then what are the qualifications of those who seek the truth, the following verse is given, verse number 28. But those men of virtuous deeds, whose sins have come to an end, who are freed from the delusion of the pairs of opposites, and are steadfast in vows, worship me. First of all, virtuous deeds, we understand. The sin, what is a sin? Sin is not a nature of a being. It is only the tarnish that has come to dim the brilliance of us. That's why virtuous deeds, when we do virtuous deeds, sins or this tarnishment is being washed away. And then he says, freedom from the delusion of the pairs of opposite. Pairs of opposite is the Maya. And then on this path, we have to stay steadfast. And then worship me, he says. That means love for God. So all introvert actions undertaken in the recognition of the self, I am, would create a new kind of impressions, new kind of a vasanas in us. And what would be the motive in the heart of those who are meditating upon the self after their minds have been readjusted by living like this kind of a life? He says, those who strive for liberation from old age and death, taking refuge in me, they realize in full that Brahma, the whole knowledge of the self and all action. This is verse number 29. So that means a true meditator meditating upon the self comes to realize his identity with this conscious principle in him, the self. To realize the self is to become self. This is what the Vedas say too. You remember those 4 Mahavakya of the Vedas? Pragyanam Brahm, Tat Tvam Asi, Ayam Atma Brahm, or Aham Brahmasmi. They all say the same thing. And this is what a true meditator realizes. And continuing the same idea and expressing how a man of wisdom, the Jnani, is a man of all knowledges and all efficiency, Lord Krishna declares in verse number 30, those who know me with Adhibhut. Adhibhut means pertaining to the elements, the world of objects. Adhidev, pertaining to the gods and sense organs. And the Adhiyagya, pertaining to the sacrifice, all perceptions. Even at the time of death, steadfast in mind, know me. So that means a man of perfection is not only a man of perfection in the realm of spirit, but he is also at all times, on all occasions, under all circumstances, all situations, is a master of himself. And he is a dynamic force to be reckoned with. He is a master of his own mind, completely. Not sometimes, all the times. So this chapter closes with a total assertion that he who knows me knows everything. And he is a man who will come to guide the destinies of the world. So in this chapter, Lord Krishna has emphasized and indicated beyond all doubts how yogic perfection could be achieved and lived to the glory of the successful seeker and to the blessing of the generations in which he lived. So that means he is not only helping himself, he is helping others also. Mere knowledge is of no practical use. Wisdom is the glow that knowledge imparts to the individual. Wisdom. That's why he used the word Jnani over there. The fulfillment of knowledge in an individual is possible only when he becomes a man of wisdom. And at the end, I would like to say the knowledge can be imparted, but the wisdom cannot be given. That we have to cultivate. The philosophical portion of all the religions, they provide the knowledge, the instructional section. That means the techniques. But then we have to, as a seeker, practice, do the sadhana, assimilate, digest into the very texture of our inner lives. Because every religion seeks to create men of wisdom. Men of wisdom. So let's end it here because that was the last verse of that chapter. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnase Purnamadaya Purnameva Visheshyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.